The image of God is who or what we are, body and soul. Now, this really gets to the heart of the question asked to Professor Wright, doesn't it? Why do we believe it's wrong to abort a child even if the child's heart has not yet begun to beat or its hands and feet aren't fully formed? Well, because not having that aspect of the image doesn't mean that this child doesn't have the image of God from the moment of conception. It's there. The image of God is there. And from that point, it's only meant to blossom further. Now, that doesn't mean that we should approach this issue in a cold and heartless manner. The reality of rape and incest, or of the mental health struggles a mother might wrestle with in the context of a pregnancy, require genuine love and concern. But we can't let these legitimate concerns relativize how we think about life and the image of God. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright made some comments about when it might be okay to get an abortion. He was prompted by a question from a young woman in Germany. This woman is wrestling with a desire to be faithful to the Bible, but wondering if it's accurate to say that a baby in the womb is truly a human person if their heart has not begun to beat. Why do we believe that it is a murder to abort, she asked, especially at an early stage of pregnancy when the fetus is not even formed, the heart is not beating yet, etc.? Now, Wright's response was controversial because while he lamented the circumstances often surrounding abortion, he also seemed to indicate that there were instances where you could get an abortion that typically pro-lifers wouldn't agree with. Here's another clip. Listen to this.
And particularly that, as you cited, in cases of rape or in cases of incest, there may be a very, very strong argument for saying this ought never to have happened, and with sorrow, because we do not want to do this in principle, but with sorrow and a bit of shame, the best thing to do is as soon as possible to terminate this pregnancy.
Wright goes on to talk about how repulsive late-term abortion is and associates it with paganism, the paganism of the ancient world. Then he says this.
In principle, this is not something which we should welcome. It is not something which we should collude with. At the same time, there may be certain exceptions, of which severe deformity might be one, of which certainly incest and rape would be others. And in those cases, I would say the sooner the better, because at a certain point, and I am not medically qualified to say at what point I would draw a line, then this is a viable human being that should then be cherished.
Okay, so Wright is a little ambiguous about when life, or we might say the image of God, begins. And this is precisely what the person asking the question is also unsure of. Is it a life if the baby isn't more developed, or if the baby's heart isn't beating? Let me briefly try to give a more definitive answer to this question. One of the reasons Christians have always taken a strong stance against abortion is because we believe that every human is made in the image of God. This is true whether you're a Christian or not. And most people don't realize this, but in the Western world, it was this very Christian concept of the image of God that motivated things like caring for the sick and dying, or even the abolition of slavery in different points in world history. Once you really believe people are made in God's image, then how you treat them matters. Personhood is closely associated with this idea of the image of God in Christian theology, and the Bible teaches us to speak up for and defend the weak and vulnerable, which includes babies in their mother's womb. The psalmist said, "You formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Psalm 139, verse 13. Made in what, one might ask? Made in the image of God. Now, is the image of God there at the moment of conception, or is it something that develops once there are arms and legs or a beating heart? Often those who are pro-choice define human personhood along the lines of conscious existence and being able to relate to other people. In other words, you need to have a degree of awareness. We know through technology that babies in the womb, especially later on in the pregnancy, do have this kind of awareness and even the ability to feel pain. But what about very early on? Well, this is where our understanding of the image of God can be helpful. You see, the image of God is who or what we are, body and soul. One ethicist and theologian put it like this, quote, "In terms of debates over personhood, one significant fact to note is that Scripture describes the image of God in terms of nature, actions, and relationships. Yet a full understanding of the image cannot be reduced to one or another of these aspects." A child who has just been conceived may be missing some of the characteristics that constitute the full image of God, but does that mean that this baby isn't, at the moment of conception, made in God's image? The answer is no. Consider how he continues. Quote, being an image bearer does not require the manifestation of all of the characteristics of image bearing. Looking at obvious cases from adult life rather than moving immediately to the murkier case of embryonic life offers evidence for this claim. Since the body is part of what constitutes the image of God, then having legs is an aspect of the image. But no one would seriously suggest that a person whose legs are amputated ceases to be an image bearer. Indeed, in an analogous situation, those who are unable to walk are the subject of special human compassion in the New Testament, and Jesus declares a paralyzed man's sins forgiven, Luke chapter 5, verses 17 through 26, an incomprehensible act if this man did not bear the image. The continuing possession of other image-bearing attributes evidently ensures that people in these situations retain the status of an image bearer. These initial considerations support the conclusion that possessing some, even if not all, of the range of characteristics that constitute the holistic image of God is sufficient to establish a human being as an image bearer. This suggests that if the embryo manifests even some of the characteristics of an image bearer, then it bears the image of God and is due all of the respect that that entails. That's Dr. David Van Druenen's book, Bioethics. Now, this really gets to the heart of the question asked of Professor Wright, doesn't it? Why do we believe it's wrong to abort a child even if the child's heart has not yet begun to beat or its hands and feet aren't fully formed? Well, because not having that aspect of the image doesn't mean that this child doesn't have the image of God from the moment of conception. It's there. The image of God is there. And from that point, it's only meant to blossom further. Now, that doesn't mean that we should approach this issue in a cold and heartless manner. The reality of rape and incest or of the mental health struggles a mother might wrestle with in the context of a pregnancy require genuine love and concern. But we can't let these legitimate concerns relativize how we think about life and the image of God. Christians stand against abortion because it extinguishes the image of God which should be cherished and protected. Sin has marred the image of God in humanity, and we don't reflect our Creator like we should. This is why Jesus, the Son of God, was conceived in the womb of the Virgin Mary, so that the image of God that had been broken by sin might be restored to wholeness again. How tragic that what Jesus came into the world to restore, our society has been so quick to discard. As Christians, God help us to exhibit a great deal of compassion and care, especially for women who are faced with the question of abortion after something as horrific and evil as sexual abuse. But let's also be careful not to treat life as something nebulous, defined by whether we have arms or legs or relationships. Life begins at conception because the image of God is there, and wherever the image of God is, it should be cared for.
Here at Sola, we're passionate about drawing on historic Reformation theology to equip thoughtful Christians for practical wisdom, connecting the dots between the Bible, doctrine, the Christian life, and contemporary culture. All that we produce is free thanks to the many who give monthly as Sola partners. If you join us as a monthly partner, we'll send you a complimentary copy of Michael Horton's book, Ordinary: Sustainable Faith in a Radical, Restless World. In an age marked by burnout and sensationalism, Horton shows us what it looks like to live a deeply normal, yet profoundly meaningful Christian life. To get your copy, simply head over to solamedia.org/partner to join us in encouraging even more people to grow in knowing God and seeing everything in His light.